Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea says it's going to fully reopen schools for in-person classes next semester in September. It'll help that teachers will likely be fully vaccinated by the end of this summer. As the economy recovers, South Korea reports its biggest rise in employment in almost 7 years. Food, hospitality, and education adding jobs for the first time in 14 months. And Moody's decides to keep its credit rating for Korea at AA2, its third highest grade, citing the country's fast economic recovery and the government's policies to support it. It's 5:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea reported more than 600 new cases of COVID-19 today for the first time in a week. About a quarter of the new cases are of the variants. But if the vaccine rollout brings that number down, the government will be easing the distancing rules from July. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korea reported 635 new cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday, of which 613 were local transmissions. Wednesdays are usually higher than other days as testing from weekdays starts to show, and today's numbers are slightly down from recent Wednesdays over the past few weeks. In addition, the R number, which shows the rate of transmission, has been slowly declining since 4 weeks ago.
Recently, the spread has been declining, but the rate of decline is very slow, and the threat of cases rising again still exists.
Adding to the threat is a recent spike in variant cases. Nearly 25% of local transmissions were shown to be a variant case, twice what the percentage of variants was last week. They are known to be more transmissible, and vaccines are not as effective against variant cases. On the other hand, the government is looking into adjusting the virus prevention measures from this July, when most of the people over 60 would have received their first shot of the vaccine.
We are doing our best with our goal of first constantly pulling new daily cases below 500. If these figures continue, we'll review distancing measures, including operating hour restrictions, and the limit on the number of people at private gatherings.
More South Koreans landed at Incheon International Airport on Wednesday morning aboard a special flight arranged by Asiana Airlines, which departed from New Delhi. This is the fourth group this month, and more than 700 Koreans have returned so far. Of those who have returned, 16 have been confirmed to have the virus so far, and one of them is known to have the new Indian variant. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea is planning to fully reopen in-person classes for all kindergartens, elementary, middle, and high schools for the next semester, which starts in September. The Education Ministry said on Wednesday that the plan is in line with the country's upcoming new COVID-19 social distancing rules, which will take effect from July. The pandemic, of course, has been seriously hampering children's education and mental development, though schools have tried their best to keep up by putting classes online. The plan to vaccinate teachers during the summer vacations expected to create a safer environment for the reopening. Recent issues with supply have slowed down the pace of South Korea's vaccination campaign, but that's expected to change with the arrival of millions more doses in the coming days. Most of those are being manufactured here in Korea. Doses will be given to almost 9 million seniors in the general public starting in about 2 weeks. Han Sung-woo has more.
A shipment of 438,000 doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine arrived at Incheon International Airport at around 1:30 a.m. on Wednesday. The shipment is enough for 219,000 people and arrives following a direct buying contract between the South Korean government and Pfizer. A total of 66 million doses have been procured, and so far, just under 2.9 million have arrived. More batches will arrive by June as South Korea aims to speed up its vaccination campaign, which has slowed down in recent days. As well as these Pfizer shipments, 835,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine acquired from the COVAX facility will arrive in Korea on Thursday at around 7 p.m. Meanwhile, 7.23 million AstraZeneca doses will be distributed throughout the nation from Friday, and those waiting for their second dose are expected to be prioritized. Second doses of the AstraZeneca shot are scheduled to start Friday, the same day that the first batches are delivered from the SK Bioscience factory in Andong, Gyeongsangbuk-do province. In the weeks ahead, South Korea will be giving the AstraZeneca vaccine to almost 9 million seniors. For those aged 65 to 74, that starts on May 27th, and for people aged 60 to 64, from June 7th. Reservations will start on Thursday for those aged 60 to 64. First doses were given on Tuesday to another 6,029 people. Just under 3.7 million people in South Korea have now received their first dose. That's about 7.2% of the population. Just over 2 million of those have received the AstraZeneca vaccine, and 1.67 million had the shot from Pfizer. Around 80,000 more people have received their second dose, meaning over 600,000 people have now had 2 doses of the vaccine. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
And turning to the economy, South Korea reported its highest job growth in almost 7 years last month. Experts say this was thanks to a recovery in economic activity, but it's also because this is compared to the massive layoffs seen this time last year. Min Soo-kyun reports.
South Korea's job market appears to be on track for recovery after a year-long slump from the COVID-19 pandemic. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of people employed amounted to 27.2 million in April, up 652,000 from a year earlier. The figure marks the largest job growth in almost 7 years. It's also the second straight month of more jobs after the country in March saw its first job growth in 13 months. The agency attributed the growth to several factors.
Improved economic activity, eased social distancing measures, and the base effect from a severe job loss in April last year have led to a second consecutive month of job growth.
By sector, the health and social welfare industry, transportation, warehousing and construction have all seen increased employment, while arts, sports and leisure activities have seen job figures plunge. But some service sectors have reported growth.
The hospitality and food industry reported its first job growth in 14 months, and the education service sector is also growing. This shows that the in-person services industry is getting better.
Meanwhile, the country's unemployment rate dropped to 4% in April, down 0.2 percentage points on year. Unemployment fell for those in their 40s, 50s and 60s, but remained high for young adults in their 20s and 30s. The number of non-economically active people also fell to 16.7 million last year, down 324,000 on year. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Moody's Investor Service has decided to keep its credit rating for South Korea at AA2, the agency's third highest rating, and it kept its outlook for Korea at stable. South Korea has been at AA2 since 2015 when it was upgraded 1 notch. Moody said this reflects the country's strong fundamentals, citing its swift recovery from the lows of the pandemic. Moody's also raised its 2021 economic growth forecast for Korea to 3.5% from its earlier forecast of 3.1%, citing strong demand for exports and the government's accommodative fiscal policy. The pandemic is dragged out for over a year now, of course. South Korea began its vaccination campaign in late February, aiming to reach herd immunity by November, and now it seems that could be possible, in fact, by September. The country's been working to develop its own vaccines, but it's also been making them on consignment for companies in other countries. For more on this, our Pei Eun-ji joins us today in the studio. Eun-ji, it's great to have you here in the studio today.
Good afternoon.
Well, you've been putting together some information on this, and right now we know that around the world there are 96 COVID-19 vaccines in clinical trials and 184 candidates before that stage in pretrial development. So Korean companies are, of course, involved in this race to develop vaccine and manufacture them. So how far has Korea gotten in its efforts to develop vaccines?
Well, Devin, some domestically developed vaccines could finish their clinical trials by the end of this year and start distribution by next year. Currently, 5 domestic companies have got the approval to conduct clinical trials for their vaccine candidates in South Korea. Of them, 2 companies are in phase 2 of their clinical trials. SK Bioscience has 2 vaccine candidates. One of them has finished phase 1, and the other one is currently in both phase 1 and 2. Another vaccine developer, U Biologics, is waiting for its phase 1 trial results, aiming to begin phase 2 in June. And one other company is in phase 1 of its clinical trials.
We plan to begin phase 3 clinical trials in the second half of this year. If this happens, we plan on getting the conditional approval by the end of this year and distributing the vaccines starting early next year.
SK Bioscience is another company that also aims to begin phase 3 clinical trials in the second half of this year and start vaccine distribution next year.
So next year we could have viable vaccines developed right here in Korea. That's good news. People have heard that there are different types of vaccines. Maybe they've heard of the mRNA technique used by Pfizer or the viral vector technique used by AstraZeneca. So here in Korea, which of these approaches are these different companies taking?
Well, none of the 5 local developers are working on mRNA vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna are using, but they are working on vaccines similar to AstraZeneca and Novavax. 2 companies, SK Bioscience and U Biologics, are working on making protein subunit vaccines, which is the traditional way of developing vaccines. This is similar to the technology used by Novavax. This type of vaccine spurs an immune response in the recipient by injecting a spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. It also adds chemical agents called adjuvants to stimulate a stronger immune response. Another company called Cellid is developing viral vector vaccines like the ones developed by AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. This technology uses a harmless virus as a delivery system to trigger the immune system to create antibodies. The other 2 companies, Genexine and Gene1 Life Science, are working on DNA vaccines.
Well, Inji, not every country has the capability to make vaccines like this. Korea, of course, this shows how developed the science and pharmaceutical industry is here. But why is it important for Korea to have access to be able to source its own vaccines locally? And as you said, it'll be ready maybe next year or so. By that time, will there still be demand for vaccines?
Well, an industry watcher that I talked with said they're important in order to quickly respond to any other infectious diseases that might break out after this pandemic is over.
Homegrown vaccines are needed to secure vaccine sovereignty. Developing vaccines and treatments against the virus is a way to protect citizens in the post-COVID-19 era and an essential factor in doing what the nation needs to do.
Well, the chief of KDCA, Jung Eun-kyung, had also said that COVID-19 may not be a virus that can be stopped by getting vaccinated just once or twice, like smallpox and polio, but a virus that could break out every year. If this is the case, it will require an annual vaccination program leading to high demand. Also, vaccines are still needed in other countries as well.
The US and Europe may have plenty of vaccine supplies, but for places like Asia and Africa, they still need to secure more vaccines. And with cases of variants of the virus, there's going to be demand.
So, Inji, South Korea is, in fact, not only developing its own vaccines, but it's making doses of vaccines that were developed in other countries, and millions of those doses will feature prominently in the country's vaccine campaign. So tell us about this manufacturing on consignment here in Korea.
SK Bioscience is currently producing AstraZeneca vaccines at its plant in Andong City, and they're also planning on manufacturing Novavax vaccines as early as June. Novavax had signed a licensing agreement with the South Korean company in August last year to produce 40 million doses of its vaccine. SK Bioscience plans to roll out 10 million doses of the Novavax vaccine within the 3rd quarter and 20 million more in the 4th quarter.
All right, Inji, a comprehensive and in-depth look at South Korea's efforts to develop and roll out vaccines. Thanks for putting that together.
Thank you.
The U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, is due to arrive in South Korea today for talks likely related to Washington's new policy on North Korea and President Moon's summit next week with President Biden. Those talks will reportedly take place tomorrow with Seoul's National Security Advisor Seo Hoon. Haines is also reportedly planning a trip to the DMZ tomorrow and a courtesy call on President Moon. Haines was just in Tokyo for trilateral talks with her Japanese and South Korean counterparts, Hirosaki Takizawa and Park Ji-won. They're expected to have discussed regional affairs, including North Korea and China. Reports say Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 35 Palestinians as Israel responds to rocket attacks by militants in Gaza that have killed at least 3 Israeli civilians. With its airstrikes, the Israeli military says it's killed 15 militants. Those strikes also caused a high-rise apartment building to collapse, but it was reportedly evacuated and there were no casualties. Kim Hyo-sun has this report.
As violence escalates between Israel and Palestine, Israeli forces on Tuesday night demolished a 13-story residential building in Gaza in an airstrike. Late into the night, Gazans reported their homes shaking and the sky lighting up with near-constant Israeli strikes. They also explained there was warning an hour before the strike. It's not clear whether it was enough time for people to evacuate. While it's not clear why the Israeli military targeted that specific building, they said it housed the offices of top Hamas officials. It's also unclear whether the airstrike led to any casualties, but electricity in the surrounding area went out following the collapse. Hamas warned it will respond by launching rockets toward Tel Aviv's residential areas. Rocket alarms have been blaring in Tel Aviv, while all flights have been halted at the country's main international airport, which is situated close to the capital city. This as Israel's prime minister warned that more is coming.
We are in the midst of a campaign. Since yesterday, the Israeli Defense Forces carried out hundreds of strikes on Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. We eliminated commanders. We hurt a lot of their quality targets. The conclusion of the meeting is to increase even more the force and also the rate of the strikes. Hamas will now receive blows that it did not expect, and I know that this also involves patience and a certain sacrifice on your part, citizens of Israel.
The violence peaked following clashes on Monday between Palestinians and Israeli police at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. The international community, including the UN, expressed deep concerns over the violence, urging no force should be used against those who exercise their rights peacefully. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The man accused of killing 8 people this past March at massage parlors in and near the U.S. city of Atlanta, including 6 women of Asian descent, could be facing the death penalty if he's convicted. The prosecutor in charge of the case has filed notice that she will be seeking the death penalty and hate crime charges against the suspect, named Robert Aaron Long. The prosecutor said this would be the first test of Georgia's new hate crime law in Fulton County, and she believes in the state. Garbage is building up in the oceans, sometimes far away in the middle of the Pacific, but increasingly closer to home. A few people in South Korea have even found it in fish they've bought. Our Kim Hyun-sung went aboard a ship that cleans up garbage to find out more.
A few weeks ago, Hong Dong-woo's mother-in-law purchased a fish from a local market in Mokpo. But when she cut open the fish, she had an unexpected surprise.
When we cut open the fish, the stench was overwhelming. The intestines were sucked into the plastic bottle, and they're all rotten and melted. I've heard about the seriousness of plastic pollution, but seeing it on my dinner table made me more aware of the issue.
And this wasn't the first time that garbage from the ocean almost ended up on their dinner table.
My mother-in-law tried to cook monkfish for me before, but when she cut open the fish, we found a ramen packet inside.
To find out how much plastic waste is harming marine life, our team went aboard a ship that works to reduce ocean pollution.
Now I'm standing on the deck of one of 4 ships in Busan that manages the ocean cleanup. They sail out to sea every single day to pick up trash from the ocean or to clean up oil spills. Now the captain says that this ship alone picks up to 300 tons of trash every single year.
On a national scale, 150,000 tons of trash are removed from Korea's oceans every year. Rarely a minute passes without another piece of trash floating past in the water.
Today was just a normal day. And on days like this, we collect roughly 1 or 2 tons of trash. During monsoon or typhoon season, we sail out 10 times a day to collect trash. I often find dead fish or birds caught up in the waste.
Activists say that the impact of trash is detrimental to not only marine life, but also humans.
Fish or other marine life will absorb microplastics and the chemical compounds will build up in their bodies. This will inevitably reach us humans, the apex predators.
Activists and governments are seeking out solutions for the problem. But in the meantime, they say that the best action that individuals can take is to recycle and reduce their use of plastics. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News, Busan.
The Seoul Arts Center is hosting the biggest exhibition South Korea's ever had of original works by Pablo Picasso. It's also the first time his anti-war piece, Massacre in Korea, has been brought here. Kim Bo-kyung went to check it out and files this report.
The largest Pablo Picasso exhibition to be held in Korea, featuring 110 works, is taking place at Seoul Arts Center. This exhibition marks the 140th anniversary of Picasso's birth, and under the exhibition title Picasso Into the Myth, it chronologically showcases his works starting from the early 1900s.
The centerpiece of this exhibition, one of the legendary artist's must-see pieces, is Massacre in Korea. Shown for the first time in Korea, the piece is said not to be based on a particular scene in the Korean War, but rather was painted to show the brutality of it.
A stark contrast between ironclad soldiers pointing weapons toward helpless civilians shows the terror of war. Known as one of Picasso's 3 anti-war masterpieces, along with Guernica and the Charnel House, the piece was completed in January 1951, 6 months after the start of the Korean War.
Unlike other anti-war paintings, this was completed during the ongoing war. And also while 2 other anti-war pieces use black and white, Massacre in Korea is shown against a green background, delivering hope.
When it comes to Picasso's art, women gave the artist great inspiration. Marie-Therese Walter, who was one of Picasso's muses, appears in 3 figure paintings in the exhibition, which depict the time of her youth as well as when her relationship with Picasso was moving toward an end. Picasso's artwork touched upon every genre of art. The Voller Suite shows a series of 100 etchings, and some of Picasso's ceramics, which opened up art for the general public, are also on display. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, we'll have heard of many types of wearable devices, and now researchers at the South Korean science university KAIST say they've developed a fabric that can display images. It's made of a fiber dipped in phosphorescent OLEDs, just like those found in a TV screen, that light up with an electrical charge. The advantage of this technique is that it's 5 times more energy efficient than existing OLEDs and produces a bright picture. The research team said this technology could soon be used in various fields like medicine and security. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.